this straight. Well, it'll do. Hi everyone, it's Jenny. Welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all well. It has been a hot second since I filmed a video, but I have moved, so there is a change of bookish set scenery. This is actually the original bookcase that I filmed my first ever video in front of, so yeah, it might change again. Who knows? Exciting times, mixing things up. But I am here to finally do my as usual, belated wrap up of last month's reading. It was a pretty good reading month. There were lots of 4-star reads. I reread Harry Potter, which was obviously a 5-star read, so I'm not even going to bother including that because it's Harry Potter and you all know about Harry Potter. But I'm going to start with the lows, and they were both actually audiobooks. So the first one was Therese Racquin by, is it Emile or Emile? I think it's just Emile Zola, and that is 19th century French classic, and I really wanted to love it. It just was so melodramatic, even though it's supposed to be a naturalist novel, and it's about Therese Racquin, who is a woman that is, after her mother dies, sent to her aunt, who has I suppose a haberdashery shop or some kind of sewing shop, and is married off to her cousin Camille, who is a sickly, selfish boy who's been overindulged by his mother, and then she subsequently is hella bored and starts having a fun old time with Camille's friend Laurent, and that was a big deal when it came out. I know it was really scandalous because there's saucy affairs, and there were parts of it that were good, but the ending, wow, it's so ridiculous. I really didn't like it. I thought it was so stupid, and I didn't have much sympathy for the characters at this point, so yeah, that was a disappointment, sadly, because I've never read him before, and that's one of his most famous novels, so maybe I'll get on with the others better, but I'm not going to rush to read something else. If you have read another novel by Zola that you think is nice, or you think is a kind of book that if I reread Therese Racquin I like it more, let me know. But the other one I wanted to say was a disappointment was The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which I think it's quite famous now because there's an Amazon series of it, which I've heard is good, but quite different from the book. It's set in 1962 America, and it's the idea that the Germans and Japanese won the Second World War, so obviously Jews are still heavily oppressed, and I think slavery is legal again, and it's all about a group of people obviously trying to, from within, eradicate this system and overturn the Nazis and the Japanese, which in theory sounds interesting, but I just found it really boring. It sounds like the sort of novel that should have a lot of plot and move quickly and be exciting, but it was really slow, I thought, and it just didn't have enough plot to sustain me, and I just didn't love any of the characters again, which is so sad. I mean, I don't read much science fiction, and this is quite a big science fiction novel, but sometimes I love science fiction. I mean, 1984 I guess is science fiction, and I love that book. It's one of my favourite books, so if you have any better science fiction recommendations, leave them below. But on to the highs, and we're going from small to big. So the first one that I loved was Affirming City by, I know I'm going to say this wrong, Cyprian Equenzi. I mean, what is one of my videos if I don't say at least one author's name incorrectly? He is a Nigerian author, and this is one of my favourite Penguin mini moderns. If you're looking to just buy a few, because some of them are not that exciting, I really recommend this one. It's one long short story about a man called, oh my gosh, what's his name? Fussy Joe. I can remember Joe, not the other part of it. Yeah, and he is a real womanizer, and is just constantly on the lookout, even though he has about 3 wives, and it's how all of his dealings with not just women but also in his band and money making schemes, how that all unravels for him, and how the women run into each other, and it's so funny and clever, and I thought it built really well, and it was clever how it's framed. I'm not gonna say too much about it because it's so short. I would spoil it for you, but it's just a really perfect short story and a great example of how this genre, I suppose, of writing can work really well. Then I have an American classic, and that is Summer by Edith Wharton. My first Edith Wharton, and I loved this. I love this cover. This is 100% why I bought this, because I had never heard of this novel before. But it is, I think it's a 20th century novel. Let me check this. See, this is also classic Jenny, like, hasn't done a research. Yes, first published in 1917. There you go, facts for you there. Oh, I forgot I had eyeshadow on. Oh, if I have smudged eyeshadow for the rest of the video, I'm just gonna have to deal with it. I'm not moving now. Oh, I've got really itchy eye though. Don't do it, Jenny. Anyway, this book is about Charity Royale, who is unhappily living with her hard-drinking adoptive father, who is also trying to marry her. It's a little bit creepy, and she has these ambitions to be independent and to, I suppose, come away from her past of coming from the mountain, because her mother came from there and it's the disreputable place in her neighbourhood, and there's a lot of interesting things about society and class in this novel from that, and the idea that you can't escape where you came from and your origins. And she's working at the library, trying to be independent and trying to earn some money, but also not particularly being attached to a job, until a young strapping lad walks in, Lucius Harney, and a romance ensues, and it made my heart ache. It's such beautiful writing, and it's short, but I got very emotionally involved with Charity, and I don't want to say anything about the end, but oh boy. I definitely think that this is an underrated classic, and though I haven't read her big novels like The House of Mirth or The Age of Innocence, I really think that this should be read more, and I think it's a great, obviously it's a bit late now in the year to read it unless you want to be really rebellious, but when next summer rolls around, give it a go. Then I have a book which I heard about from Jean's Bookish Thoughts, and that is Bodies of Water by V.H. Leslie, which, when you hear the plot, is not going to surprise you that I like this. It is part set in the Victorian period and part in modern day, so it follows two different female characters, as Evelyn in Victorian period and Kirsten in modern day, and it is set in, I suppose, a kind of woman's sanatorium in the Victorian period, and Evelyn is a woman who is overexhausted and burnt out from all of her goodwill work with the poor, and subsequently is sent to this place by the Thames where they believe in the water cure, so there's lots of different water treatments that she undergoes. And then Kirsten, in parallel modern day, is moving into this place that was the sanatorium, which has since been renovated into flats, and she is haunted by a figure of the river, a woman, and water in general that comes into the house, and there's lots of slightly sinister, creepy things. And I liked this because I can't deal with anything super scary, but this is a really nice time of year to read this kind of book, because it's a little bit spooky, but it's not actually a horror. So it's also really interesting how it looks at treatment of women and how things were changing a bit, because it wasn't all about like it was in the 18th century, just chaining you to a bed and people coming to look at you and jeer at you and being an exhibit like you're in a zoo. It's changing to be a bit kinder to women, but it's more about not exerting yourself, not doing anything, not working or thinking or engaging your brain in any kind of way, really, and how their attitude towards mental health was changing. Not necessarily in a helpful way, but at least it wasn't as harmful. And I liked how it talked about the Thames and London, and it was a fun read, and I really enjoy books that have two different narrators or time periods in the novel, so this is a good, quick, fun read. Then I have a book which I've had on my TBR for flipping ages, and I finally got round to reading. That is Angela Carter's The Magic Toyshop. I love this book for a number of reasons. I love this cover. There are lots of clever imagery from the book in the cover, but I really, to be blunt, liked that it begins with a girl masturbating. That might sound very controversial. It's beautifully described, like, don't be put off by that, but I liked that there's a woman who's exploring her sexuality, and that there was a portrayal of puberty that wasn't negative, because I think it's really taboo as a subject, women masturbating, and it was quite nice to say, look, like they do this and they enjoy it and it's common and it's okay. Anyway, aside from that, it is about Melanie, who, well, at the beginning, goes out in her mother's wedding dress, and it's very beautiful imagery, like it's like gothic, and I really loved that. And then after that night, suddenly finds out that her parents have died, and she has to be sent away to live with her Aunt Margaret, who she's never met, who is mute, and her brothers Francie and Finn, who are Irish, and that was wonderful. I loved that. They play music together. But Aunt Margaret's husband, Uncle Philip, is very domineering and authoritative, and he makes life-size puppets and dolls, and has, you know, a toy shop, and it's really clever how it's written. I loved the characters so much. I loved the way she writes. I haven't read physically one of her novels for a while, but it was so engrossing. The only thing I would say is that the ending is far too rushed, and there's a twist at the end I did not see coming, and it just felt, it was quite uncomfortable. I thought, oh, I don't know how I feel about this book anymore. But I still gave it 4 stars. I still would really recommend it, but wow, that twist at the end, it just feels a bit like the last chapter. You just needed another chapter, another 10 pages or something, and that's a little disappointing, because that stopped at being 5 stars for me. But I did get really engrossed, because there are all these signs that something is strange and something isn't right, and I enjoyed that a lot. And the tension that Uncle Philip creates in the house, and how that affects the different relationships and how that builds, is really clever. I think this is great. And again, it's a good time for you to read this kind of thing, because it is a bit gothic. Then I'm going to quickly mention that I finally finished reading Roald Dahl's short stories. This was wonderful, because I loved him as a child. He is my favourite children's author, but I forgot how good he is at adult writing as well. A lot of these stories are really dark and quite macabre, really, but it was such a joy. And there are also excellent audiobook collections of his stories, and I think they're really geared towards being read out loud. I really loved them, and he's so great. And it was nice to remember ones that I hadn't read for years and discover new ones. I particularly liked Roald Jelly, about a man who keeps bees and uses that to help his child gain weight, like a bee, but it goes askew. And I also really liked Mrs Bigsby and the Colonel's Coat, about a woman who is having an affair and is given a beautiful mink coat and is trying to hide it from her husband and justify it. I really loved that. He always has excellent twists at the ends of his stories, and if you haven't read Roald Dahl short stories, I would really recommend them. Maybe start with a smaller collection than this. Obviously, Land from the Slaughter is also one of the best ones, but I've read that several times, so the new ones I discovered were plentiful and wonderful, and yes. And then last but not least is the beautiful, the wonderful, The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock by Imogen Hersham. I know that Tom Reads Things will be thrilled that I'm mentioning this. You should also all go and subscribe to Tom Reads Things. I'll link his channel down below. He is wonderful and enthusiastic and a joy to watch. But anyway, this is a book that I buddy read with Pauline from Dancing Law. You should also go and subscribe to her. Leave the channel down below. And I raced ahead and read this. I was terrible. I read nothing for ages because I was sick, and then I read all of it. This is about a merchant, Jonah Hancock, whose agent returns from his voyage to say that he has sold Jonah Hancock's ship and instead bought a mermaid. And in order to recuperate the loss of income from his ship being sold, he puts on an expedition of said mermaid. And then it's also about Angelica Neal, who is an ambitious prostitute, I suppose. I didn't want to just simplify her and call her a prostitute, but she's a very saucy wench, and I loved her. She's just so brazen and headstrong, but also romantic, and it's also about how they cross paths and intertwine, and how their fortunes are changed by each other's meetings and building relationship. I really loved the way it looked at women in this novel. I thought that was done so well, because it lays bare the fact that women has just no choice. You know, if you were on your own, you had to marry or work, and if you were pretty and didn't have many other means of having any kind of security, then you would go into a brothel and be under a man, because at least you then had some kind of constant shelter. And it doesn't beat around that, and what happens when you're a mistress and the man who's paying for you decides to cast you off, you know, how few options you have. And I really liked that. It's quite sympathetic. Well, it is very sympathetic towards women in that position, and I really liked that, because this is set, I should say, in the Georgian period. So is it 1760 something? 85? 1785. So yeah, a tough time for women. And also about the expectation of women, if they are married, to produce children and an heir. It was just beautifully written. It's an incredible debut. I mean, this is impressive for a debut. I will say that it does feel very crafted to me. There are some writers that write really well and it feels effortless, whereas this felt very much like, I have very carefully constructed this sentence, and that is fun. That is not a criticism at all. I'm just saying that it's a really admirable start, and I would love to see what she does next. So there we go. That was probably, once again, much longer than I thought it was going to be, considering I only talked about 8 books or something. But I would love to know what you read in September, or if you are interested or have read any of these books that I mentioned. And hopefully I can get some actual Booktober videos up soon and have some more time to film now I'm pretty much settled in my new home. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon for Bookish Shenanigans. Bye!